Okay, so good morning. Today is January the 24th. This is a meeting of the Oregon State Board of Trustees Finance and Facilities Committee. And Vince Jones. Can we please, so this meeting is called to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Sure. Trustee Rupp? Here. Trustee Stewart?
Here.
Trustee Starr?
Here.
Chair Jones?
Here.
And we have President Hagenoff and Tina Quorum.
Thank you. All right, so welcome everyone. Good to see everyone here in Wilsonville. Got a lot to get through on the agenda today, so we're gonna push through and be done by 10:45. There's a lot of action items, so I thank you all for being here. Just keep that in mind. The first item on the agenda is the consent agenda. So, first of all, let me welcome Trustee Mike Starr. So thank you, Mike, for being here. And I guess the way that this will work is the executive committee will meet after this meeting to officially have you become a member of the Finance and Facilities Committee. Thank you for being here this morning, and then after that, you'll have an opportunity to hold on. Once the executive committee has officially brought you into the group.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so it's good to see everyone. Second item on the agenda is the consent agenda, and it's 2.1, approval of the minutes of the November 15, 2018 meeting. So this is the consent item. Let me just ask if there's anyone that has any questions or comments about the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Okay, so with that said, those meeting minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is 3 reports, and it's 3.1 Fiscal Operations Advisory Council, Richard Bailey.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Yes, we can hear you. Good morning.
Hey, just wanted to review a couple of things that FOAC has been working on since we last met. In your consent agenda a little bit later, you're going to be looking at the budget development principles. We talked about those last meeting, the ones that FOAC had developed, and we have been using those principles to guide us in our discussions at our meetings that we've had since last time we met. So one of the things that we met and talked about was the strategic enrollment management proposal to increase our budget by $755,000. The council was supportive of this request and find that it is aligned with the budget development principles that we had outlined before. We also heard a report from OMIC and the capital project report and find that those were aligned with the budget principles that we have. There is a little bit of concern on campus, some of the faculty with some of the classroom technology, and we're somewhat concerned with the departure of our IT, Jim Jones, to make sure that that continues to be an important item and one that we address with respect to the budget. Other things that we're looking at, the tuition recommendation committee has met and is working on coming up with a recommendation to the president with respect to tuition. We'll be addressing that in our next meeting, our next FOAC meeting, looking at what that tuition recommendation is, how it's being developed. There is some concern over the governor's recommended budget, at least the base budget without any additional revenues might cause some difficulties with OIT's budget, and we're concerned about how those will be addressed in if that budget comes through. Our next meeting is scheduled for February 7th, and we will be looking at the foundation report for the capital campaign. We'll be getting an audit update, an update on the governor's recommended budget and the legislative process, where they stand, and we'll be looking at the mid-year budget and adjustments to that budget. That's the end of my report. Any questions?
Okay. Anyone have any questions for Richard? So, Richard, I have a question. I just want to make sure I understand. One of the first comments that you made was the topic of classroom technology, and you mentioned some concerns as far as that goes, and with the departure of Jim Jones. Can you just elaborate on what you mean specifically by classroom technology?
Well, we've replaced chalkboards, thank goodness. So they're gone. We now have smart boards in most of the classrooms. Some of these smart boards have old technology in them with bulbs that are burning out, and they are very, as I understand it, they are very expensive to replace. And so we're holding off on replacing those because we're going to replace the whole smart board screen with LED bulbs or with LED technology, but we haven't got there yet. And so we're kind of, the smart boards don't really work. The chalkboards are gone, and we're waiting for an upgrade.
Okay.
Right?
All right, I get it. So you're talking in general, just classroom technology and the tools that you use and that your colleagues use in each classroom. And it sounds like you want to just ensure that there is, and maybe Dr. Nagy can comment on this, but just a smooth transition as we seek a new CIO, making sure those types of issues are addressed. Is that kind of summarize what your concerns are, what your thoughts are?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Sure, Jones, if I may, what Professor Bailey is referring to are also some challenges faculty encountered on the first day of class, as I heard. There are a couple of many different things in motion. Even with the CIO transition, these things will continue. Jim worked with, I think it's called Academic Technology Advisory Committee, if I know the acronym correctly, and on designing the classrooms at Oregon Tech. So we did invest probably close to $100,000 this year upgrading some of the classrooms. There are proposals being looked at between, it would cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 on an average per classroom, and it is being just planned how best to deploy that and which rooms to prioritize, because we don't want to go improve a classroom when the building is going to be renovated next year. So looking through, there is a plan evolving. Those plans will continue even through the transition. So thank you, Richard, for bringing attention to us.
Thank you, Richard. Any other questions for Chair Bailey? Okay, with that said, that brings to a close the report from the FOAC. Hey, Richard, again, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, so is it common knowledge that Jim Jones is leaving, or did you just give away a secret?
It's been announced.
It has been announced? Okay. And when is it last day?
Which one is it? I'm sorry. Yeah, June 30th.
June 3rd. Oh, okay, so he's got a couple more meetings.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Great. All right, moving on. The next item on the agenda is 4 action items. The first item is 4.1, approval of the fiscal year 2019 committee work plan. Brian?
And,
Oh,
5.1.
that's right, I'm sorry. So, there's a note right here. So there was a suggestion made that we take item 5, discussion items, out of order and talk about that first because it kind of relates to 1 and 2 of these action items on the agenda. So if no one objects, then we will move item 5 up and take that now out of order, and then we'll go to item 4. Everyone okay with that? All right. So with that said, we move to item 5, discussion items, and the first item is 5.1, state budget update and timeline. Brittany Miles.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the purpose of my presentation today is to walk you through a little bit about how the state decides the Oregon Tech's budget, and then talk about why this session is a little bit more unpredictable than it normally is. So basically, Oregon Tech receives its money from the state for operating through a fund that's called the Public University Support Fund. This fund is a fund that funds all 7 public universities. And therefore, all 7 public universities lobby together collectively for operating dollars. The state's money that flows through this public university support fund represents 40% of Oregon Tech's operation dollars. So it's a significant amount of Oregon Tech's budget. Normally, the governor releases her budget in December, and Brian and the tuition committees begin their tuition setting process off of the governor's budget. However, this year, she released 2 budgets. One that reflects the current revenue the state is getting. In that budget, she flat funded the universities, meaning there would be no new revenue in that budget.
No new increases to allocations to the university.
Correct, yes, and obviously our costs rise every year based on salary increases, per heads, those types of things. So that would be it would leave Oregon Tech in a significant hole if that first budget that the governor released was the actual number we ended up receiving from the state at the end of legislative session. She also released a second budget number. This is what's called her investment package, and it was reflective of the idea that there will probably be a $2 billion revenue package that comes out of the legislature. In that scenario, she prioritized the Public University Support Fund and increased that fund by $120 million. That would allow Oregon Tech to keep its tuition under 5%, tuition increases under 5%. So obviously we like the second budget scenario a lot better. However, that second budget scenario is very far from certain. Now the budget process goes on to the legislature, and they are really the folks that make these decisions about the budget and how much Oregon Tech ultimately receives. And we are hearing mixed things about the legislative agenda for the leadership. Is there a question?
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. And so there is less certainty than there normally is because of these factors. and I've passed that information along to the tuition setting committee. And we will be learning more about what the legislature is thinking about how they're going to fund higher education and what level at the end of February, early March, when the co-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee release their budget. So with that, I think I would turn it over to Brian.
Let me add two
Yeah.
things to it.
Sure.
Just, particularly, Mike, for your benefit, the 7 universities get slightly north of 750 million from the state. So the 120 million she referred to is an increase to all 7 universities to take the budget to the next level. And we typically get 5% of that pool. So the state's 800 plus million, 750 million. Oregon Tech gets 5%, 4 to 5%. And that happens to be 40% of all. So in their universe, it's a small percentage. In our universe, it's a large percentage. That's why these numbers are significant.
What's the annual, you talk about normal, you call it escalation, so what's the normal percent increase that
Yeah,
Oregon Tech year?
so for us, and again, some odd pieces, we end up having kind of a stair step to our escalators because we're driven on our retirement costs through the states. You'll hear PERS and PEB thrown around. PERS, Public Employee Retirement System. It recalculates every other year, and so this fiscal year, we've known what our rates would be for this year and the prior year. It will recalculate headed into the next year. It's likely to go up somewhere 18 to 20%. I mean, and we're going to do that every other year for the next 6 years. Overall, between PEB and PERS increases, we expect that to be 3% of our overall budget, and that's before you get to any raises or cost of living adjustments for our staff. So I would assume somewhere between, at the low end, 6%, at the high end, probably 7-8% of just kind of standard escalation, at least in coming into an even fiscal year. The second year of that is usually a little bit lower, so we're probably sitting in the 3, 4, 5 range.
All right.
I guess the only other thing I would add in terms of the timeline is whatever the legislature passes in terms of a revenue package and ultimately what Oregon tax operating dollars are, most likely the revenue package, i.e. a tax increase, will go to the ballot and be on the ballot in January 2020. So that adds another level of unpredictability in terms of helping our students understand what their tuition is, because we don't have a lot of certainty about what the revenue package will be and what our funding will be, especially in the second year of the biennium.
So is it correct to say that the governor releases a budget, the legislature issues their own budget? That's what they're looking at right now.
That's right. So the governor, at the end of November, let the legislature know what her priorities were through her 2 different budget scenarios. Now it's the legislature's turn, and that's really where the heavy lift is, because they have to find enough members that all agree that those are the same priorities and take those priorities back to their districts.
As a kind of a planning function for us as we go through the tuition setting process, and we have kind of a public tuition setting process, which has its pluses and minuses to it, and we involve a large kind of section of the campus constituency. In our planning for that, we have typically used the governor's budget, and then that allows us to set a base scenario, and we've, at least for the kind of last kind of medium term, have been able to have the legislature beat the governor's budget, which gives us a good base to plan off of, and then maybe you come home with a little bit more. This year, given the 2 divergent pathways on a governor's budget, and a legislature that to some extent has said, I don't know, that puts a lot of instability. Like, we don't have kind of the bedrock that we would typically plan off of right now. We will have a much better sense come into February then it doesn't get finalized until May, June, July. That framework is usually a pretty good place to go off of. And so we're about 3 months behind getting a key piece of information for us to do our tuition.
So you'll set all tuition based on the assumption that framework, even though there may be a valid measure.
Yeah, that's right. And our sense right now, and Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong on this, our sense right now is that framework that the legislature releases will, and you'll hear it as the co-chair's budget. They've got 2 chairs that run their budget setting committee. That will not include a revenue package. They will be working a revenue package, but they'll set a framework budget on current revenues. It's a more stable place. I've got a lot of concern about setting a budget on a revenue package that may or may not survive a valid measure.
But it reminds us again of the approval process tuition. So if you set it once, but then end up having to adjust.
Yeah, so we would need to do one of 2 things. Either bring to the board essentially a range that's a kind of a series of if-then statements, right? If X amount of appropriations, then Y tuition. Or we would come and set a tuition level and probably have a discussion about what those if-thens would be, but then bring it back at either a summer meeting or call a special meeting of the board.
And the governor invited the university president on the day she released the budget. We are all meeting with her again end of next week, January 31st. She again has invited us. Now she has more feedback from legislature. Where it will all go, we don't know. Definitely we won't be any more confirmed on that date. So we have to work with a lot of if-then scenarios. And also there is a clear interest to keep the tuition low as we would like to. Last time, it was the same scenario 2 years ago when the legislature got it, there were no increases, but there were no bounds on tuition. This time, they've already shared their interest to keep the tuition at 5% rate, which is where we kept it last time, but it took a lot of.
Where the balance comes from.
Well, actually, governor stipulated, and then by the state process, if it is more than 5%, we have to go in front of higher education coordinating commission, get their approval. So.
Hey, Jones, we have trustee Gomez on the phone as well, so she's going to be Skyping in just for people's notifications.
Okay, great.
I have a couple of questions, I guess, about timing for the tuition setting process and then sort of strategy. It sounds like, you know, things are pretty up in the air as far as what an appropriate sort of level of tuition increase really is and what we actually can do, what the heck will allow us to do as far as whether or not we're going to try to set a series of tuition sort of increases and then kind of see which one matches best with what we end up with. I worry about doing that so much because of the stability process of the, students have to plan for that, parents have to plan for that, students who are currently enrolled have to plan. And so do we have a strategy on sort of minimizing the uncertainty?
I very much appreciate that, Trustee Gomez, and that is the stability and predictability piece. That's the thing that concerns me the most, and and this will actually come up in the next docket item on the work plan. What we're requesting from this group is actually to delay the tuition setting until our May meeting instead of in our March meeting as we typically would, to buy us some more time to slow the process with our students, so that we have some additional information, so that we don't, what I don't want to do is bring to them, okay, it'll be somewhere in this, +5 to +15 range, and we'll figure that out midsummer once you're gone, because that exactly doesn't allow our students to plan. It impacts our ability to package and distribute financial aid. And so that stability piece is important. On the other side of that, we have pretty clear indication from the governor that she does not want to see tuition go beyond 5%. The Trustee Starr's question about what's your cost escalator, if we're sitting kind of north of 8% and tuition is capped at 5, state appropriations go up by 3 to 4%, we've got a gap there. And so that's the piece that we're fighting right now to see how hard is that tuition structure at 5%. Where is the legislature really going to come down at? And I would suspect that if the legislature can't come up with dollars, they will relax a tuition constraint. They may not like it, but they also recognize the reality. And there'll be pressure from labor groups to relax the tuition constraint. They won't be all that public about it, but they want to ensure that we've got sufficient revenues. I don't know if that gives you a clear answer other than to say there's a couple of these variables out there. That stability is a key one for us and why we think we need to play for time right now.
Right. Gosh, this is so tricky. I guess, again, I would just iterate the sort of importance of providing stability to students, even if it's not optimal, right? So at least they can plan for a worst case scenario. What I really worry about is, you know, they try to be more aggressive than they normally would be on the revenue side, and that ballot measure doesn't pass. And now, you know, all the planning that everyone did for the budget that they thought was going to happen is now sort of doesn't really exist. And so now, how you handle that, and we're going to see now more increases in tuition, and it's going to affect, you know, faculty and staff and everybody. And I really worry about sort of how that scenario is going to play out if everything doesn't go according to the governor's plan. And, you know, there's a lot of variables there. So I want to make sure that we're doing the work to try to insulate the institution and our students from all of that sort of variability as much as possible.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree and have significant concern around planning for the governor's investment budget, which is what we were initially asked to do, is plan around a significant increase that A, may or may not happen, B, may or may not be vetoed by voters in 9 months' time. So yeah, loud and clear.
Thank you, Brian.
So Brian, I got another question, I guess. So the other side of the equation, the cost or expense side. So what is our duty as far as to work through the levers that we have on the other side so we can reduce the amount required?
So some of that I'll turn over as maybe a strategy question. Sorry to punt to the boss.
One of the things, we, knowing all the uncertainty, this year we wanted to be a little more prepared ahead of time. So in planning the budget for the next year, first of all, I want to thank Brian and Stephanie for rolling out kind of a bottom-up process where everybody gets to participate in designing the budget. In that, we have asked people to consider 3 scenarios, the 0% flat budget, the 5% potential reduction in the budget, and a 3% possible investment in the budget. So we kind of know going into this process and with a clear understanding of what the possibilities are, so we can plan accordingly.
And it's important to note each of the scenarios. So the down 5, flat, +3, even the +3, you've got to, where our departments are having to take into account increases in fringe benefit. So even a +3 that's a flat for them. It doesn't cover it. So it's a flat or a minor cut depending on the department structure. So we're forcing the departments to come in and say, all right, where do you create some space? We have, I started out in the banking world and we looked at maturity transformation problems. So you'd end up with like a liability that's a long-term liability and a short-term asset. We have a similar problem with our revenue and expense. We have very few short-term levers to drive down our expense base. We end up with a long-term contract with indefinite tenure, so there's a long process around those. But for us to work down kind of the structural basis is a 3 to 4 year process before we begin to realize savings for kind of major swaths of the institution or swaths of the expense we've got some challenges on that side of it.
So let's go ahead and, I'm sure Brian will have an opportunity to talk about some of those things in these next agenda items, but let's kind of move on. But first of all, Brittany, thank you for your report. Appreciate it. And, good morning, Jessica. So let's just reflect in the minutes that, Trustee Gomez has joined the committee meeting. It's about 8:20. Okay, so let's move on. So we go back to our agenda and we go to item number 4, action items. The first is 4.1, approval of the fiscal year 2019 committee work plan. Brian?
And I will make up time on this one to get us back on schedule. So this, every year, typically in the kind of our last meeting, our late spring meeting, we adopt a work plan for the upcoming year for this committee, which has been very helpful for me and for the F&A division as we plan our work through the year. This is an update on that and some suggested changes through the end of the year. Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you. Will you just present screen? Thank you. So I will kind of run.
Is it working?
No, that's all right. I'll run through this very quickly. Thank you. If you'll go forward just a couple slides, just that one is perfect. So just from kind of how these are structured, so you can read the tables. The first one we end up splitting into kind of major topics, minor topics. Major topics either being kind of significant action items or pretty significant kind of strategic discussion or information. Just kind of a basic structure piece. Yeah. Next slide. I'll skip over this meeting, go to the next one. So we had in our initial plan set to have come back to this committee for a decision on tuition at its March meeting. The major change in the calendar is to push that to the May meeting and to replace the conversation in spring. I think the question that you, Trustee Jones or Trustee Stark, asked with expense ratio analysis, and this is us looking at peer institutions, something that Stephanie Pope in the budget office has been doing. So look at peer institutions, how are they spending their resources, how are we spending our resources to start to stack up and see if we're out of line with industry norms. It's always hard to adjust your institution structure to others. That is the major change for this group and a request from staff, something we have worked with our tuition committee, and they're comfortable, in fact, would very strongly prefer from our students and faculty on that group that we push out the tuition decision, get a little more certainty from the legislature on where that's likely to be, so that we can in turn provide some of that certainty that Trustee Gomez is stressing and is very important. So that's the primary change in this year's work plan. And then we've got a draft of next year's work plan, and the major item for that is actually restructuring our finance dashboards. I think we put something together that's been pretty good, gotten us into a good place. I think there are some changes that I've been contemplating. I want to work through those for a little while and bring those back in the fall to this group. So that's on next year's work plan. We wouldn't be adopting that, but just kind of to signal that early. And with that, I will kind of close my discussion there and open it up to questions or thoughts.
Okay, any questions?
So that all sounds reasonable, and I totally support moving the tuition discussion in May. The reason is but that delayed this whole process, it delayed your expense comparison. And when are you looking at the ratio of that?
We would bring that in March. And so that it opens up time in March for us to have that conversation. And that will help us. Right now, we have started into the budget setting process. So that's a good thing for us to be discussing at the front end of that.
Okay. So this is an action item. Let me read the staff recommendation. So this is agenda item 4.1. The staff recommendation is, staff recommends the committee adopt the fiscal year 2019 Finance and Facilities Committee work plan as described in the docket. I need a motion.
So moved.
Okay, and I need a second for that motion.
Are we modifying the sequencing on that, because you just said we want to move the tuition to the next meeting, right?
That is included in,
Okay.
in what's in the docket.
Second.
Okay, so,
Can I have somebody else second instead of trustee Starr, since he's not officially appointed?
Oh.
But I appreciate it.
Okay, sorry.
I appreciate
I'll just
it.
ask him one question. I know Hoyle's rules.
Sorry, sir.
I will second.
Thank you, trustee Russ.
thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Those opposed? Okay, with that, that motion is approved. So we'll go to 4.2, adoption of fiscal year 2020 budget development goals. VP Fox?
Great, thank you.
Oh, sorry. I'll go first.
If you just hit stop presenting, I don't have a PowerPoint for this one, more of a discussion. That way,
Can you push?
um,
Okay. Not working off.
oh, that's probably on off button, yeah, gets me every time.
I like the battery.
For this docket item, if folks are looking in their docket, it begins on page 9. We are starting the budget setting process, and we're doing that in kind of a couple of sequences which are described in the docket, and I'll kind of walk through those. The first of which is to send the departments, and we started this last year, and this is, I think, a good change, so there's growing pains with it, is instead of setting the budget sort of centrally from campus, from Snell Hall, making all the decisions there, we're pushing out into the departments to say, what do what are your budgets, what do you need, kind of forcing the department to own those, to develop them, and to take more control over their budgets. The first stage of that is to send out a template to the department saying, hey, our top line, we need you to come back with some options for us at +3, flat, -5. And those will actually go to, on the academic side, to the deans and to the provost, so that they are responsible to bring back over their entire division, down 5, flat, +3, and they can make trades to greater extent than that within their unit, so it gives them much more operating control lower down in the organization. The same is true in the functional division, vice president level, so we're responsible to bring forward to the president of +3, flat, -5. Another section of that will be strategic investment. So are there places where departments or functional executives feel like there's need for us to make investments to move the institution forward? So we're trying to create some fiscal space on the front end. Along with that, we think it's really important to get some guidance from this group on how it is that we would judge whether we've kind of created a good budget. And so that's true on both the strategic investment side and in managing the ongoing cost side. And with those, taking feedback from the Professor Bailey discussed today from FOAC, who laid out their thoughts on what budget principles should be, taking the 11 short-term action goals that the board approved in November, and as well as the board's kind of investment policy, or kind of strategic fund investment policy, is useful for us to think about what is the ordinal preference of the board and spending resources, kind of pushing those together to come up with a couple of guiding principles for us. This being prioritized recruiting, retaining, and graduating students. To read that bluntly, that's serve your students, that's drive top line revenue. Invest in faculty, staff, and infrastructure to support student success, and I think that lines up really well with some of the feedback that we heard this morning from Professor Bailey around need for having quality faculty in front of our students, making sure we're retaining the folks that are doing the teaching and learning, as well as investing in some of this core infrastructure, including IT. Got to focus on align programs and initiatives with industry demands. It's something that we've continually been focused on is positioning our departments, which they do a very effective job of continuing to position the departments and our offerings with not just where we can get students, but where students are exiting and into the labor force and our connection with industry. Manage operating efficiencies in all aspects of the academic and administrative units, looking to drive efficiencies across the board. And then the last one is sort of an overarching, we've got a lot of short-term uncertainty, and so we've got to be planning for that as we establish the budget, keeping an eye on the long-term sustainability. And so as much as we've got to manage what may be some short-term perturbations, we've got to keep our eye on how to position the institution, and that is largely around transition from 40% state funding to something more sustainable in 15, 20, 25% range. That will not happen overnight, but we've got to be positioning ourselves to move off of that. So those are the principles that we've laid out as a way that we think will help us guide an effective budget setting process for this year and likely in future years. With that, I turn it over. I don't know if Dr. Nandi, you have anything to add?
You summarized it well. I think even though we have all this budget pressure, we cannot take the eyes off possible investment. We need to grow certain areas and not just try to survive from buying in. So.
Okay. Is that it?
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Sure.
absolutely. Go ahead.
So it seems kind of, so if I was one of these department heads and I was given this challenge to hit a 5% reduction, and I did it. And then I know that my increases escalation outpace even that, so I didn't even meet my goal. So I guess, is there a connection or an understanding between these groups or these departments of what the annual escalation and what the challenge, and it just seems like it's kind of even the stretch goal isn't enough to even hit what flat funding would be.
Yeah. So we have so one of the vehicles. Let me kind of repeat the question back to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. But is there a broad understanding, kind of outside of the senior executives, of what the kind of budget pressures are sitting on the institution? I think the answer to that is probably a yes and a no. So there is some awareness around adverse cost escalation. That we have got to be positioning ourselves to shift away from state funding. So like that level of detail, I suspect that is out there. Level of detail, what are the numbers? What's the sort of scale and magnitude of some of those issues? I suspect not. We are trying to get at, one of the ways that we try to push that out to the department is, one, in conversations with the deans, really trying to work through them with their department chairs and empower them to kind of manage that. So I think there's room for improvement for me and the finance side to have some of those conversations directly with the chairs, who are, that's the most important frontline manager for us. And the other way that we go about that is through the FOAC, the Fiscal and Operations Advisory Committee, which is really a faculty-driven committee to look at the budget, to making sure that those folks who end up being the people that other faculty look to say, yeah, what they're saying, does that make sense? We really look to them to make sure that they're well educated, so that they may not like the problem, but at least you know, yeah, that's real, and we've got to deal with it. And I appreciate Richard Bailey, the chair of that, who gets it. And in our conversations, he understands where those issues are. Pushing that out is always a process.
I'll just add to that. I think this was kind of in conversation around the time I came. That's why it's important the chairs and deans in the budget process, so that they can understand what is here. Otherwise, the tradition has been it was prescribed to them and from the center, and they had a budget to work with. Really, the challenge for academic institutions is a large percentage of our budget or in personnel. So I don't know what the ratio is, but 80, which is actually a little better than some of the other institutions over time. In the world I came from, it was 97% personnel, 3% operations in the college. So, that is because of budget cuts. You kind of keep shaving off in other areas. So over time, you just have to work through that, create more awareness. And also in this process, we are also trying to identify incentives so that when colleges become entrepreneurial, create additional revenue streams, they get to retain something, invest in other innovative approaches. So this is, I don't believe in approaches, kind of falling on that. We have to cut. It's also an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, get creative.
That is a place, and we'll see when they look at the mid-year budget adjustment. Shifting resources into a place where I think we have systematically underinvested, and that's in enrollment management, and that's, I mean, this is growth top line. We've kind of focused, we have allowed ourselves, or gotten into a place where, hey, the folks that know us come to us, and not how do we become known, you know, get out there and beat the bushes and recruit and pull folks into what we think is a really high quality product and something that, from my read, is well positioned in the market to grow. So I think we have capacity to grow the top line. We've got to be managing that in the middle of the budget.
So in your report, Brian, so you talk about using the budget template and developing a 5% reduction flat and a 3% investment scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is kind of a newer way of establishing the budget, and you're giving responsibility to the rest of the team and professors and administration to develop those budgets. And so one of the things that you included was that these are aggressive targets given the university's tradition of base plus budgeting and a little active department management. So when I read that, I take that to mean, because we're doing it this way with the budget template, these people that have to develop these kind of sort of have like a buy-in of the budget where they're more involved than in the past. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. That, you know, we want folks within kind of the frontline units at the department level to build the budget themselves, have an understanding, and we'll, you know, go back, have that back and forth, help train folks up, but that has not traditionally been the case. There are growing pains associated with it.
Right.
Stephanie will have more gray hair at the end of this spring than she has now, because of that process, but it absolutely drive that ownership part.
And so one of the other things that you had in your report was just it's the policy priority as well as the likelihood of revenue packages being referred to the voters creates significant levels of uncertainty in the university funding levels. So can you elaborate on that? I think I know what it means. If there's like a bond issue or something that the voters have to vote on, we kind of have to rely on them to get those measures passed. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and this it relates back to the last conversation we had with Miles. There's a lot of concern that even if we were to get a good budget from the state, that would be predicated on a new revenue package. That revenue package is almost certain to be referred to the voters. And so the part is, even if we get a good budget, I wouldn't be willing to bet you that it lasts more than 9 months, which means that we need to be positioned to very quickly work down our cost structure. If we're building a budget based on significant additional state funding, we're going to need to be ready to work that down really quickly if in January of 2020 the voters board and don't ratify it.
Right. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments on item 4.2?
Are we anticipating that the voters will not approve the revenue package? Is there any feeling on which way they're gonna lean? So, I could spend, 15 minutes on that question, but the short answer is I am optimistic currently with the way the revenue package is being structured. And lessons learned from the failure of Measure 97 that didn't pass, that they will be successful in passing a revenue package at the ballot in January. Ask me again next week, and that answer might be different. So I'll be keeping in touch with the executive team quite closely as this goes along to help them understand what the unpredictability in the legislature and the ballot measure means for Oregon Tech and planning their finances.
And so this is kind of something that's really, so like the next time committee meets, I'm sure you'll have an update for us on the status on those issues and how other things are going with the legislature. Absolutely.
Where the big ones, cap and trade, corporate and cigarette taxes bottom.
Yeah, and they're also discussing decreasing income tax for low income earners, which would also make it more popular at the ballot and take away the argument that a tax increase on businesses is really a tax increase on everyone because the tax increase on business gets passed along. If there was some income relief for low income earners, which is what they're talking about this week, it might potentially do better at the ballot.
Dr. Knight, did you have comments?
No, I think it's just every week it is moving in a different frequency.
I think so. A great example of what you just heard is, Brittany's job is to be optimistic and make good things happen, and my job is to be pessimistic and worry about when they don't.
Plan for the worst.
Yeah, so I very much hope that Brittany is right.
You know, the 120 million figure was made refer to like the consensus among the presidents in order to keep the tuition at 5% or below at all the universities. That's kind of what we would need. As a matter of fact, Tech has asked for 168 million from the state in order to put in additional retention measures and serving underserved populations and so forth. So the 120 is kind of the figure that government worked with based on the request from the president. But the challenge is going back to what Brian said in response to Trustee Russ's question. They could give us a budget because the governor said, assume we have 120 as planned. Assuming even legislature gives us a budget or between the governor and the legislature, if the measure does not pass, they have no recourse but to cut from the university. And at that time, we cannot give our cash. So aware of what the cost multipliers are. People pay.
I do want to make sure that this committee is comfortable with the goals and the principles that we've laid out. Those are what we will be distributing to campus and will inform our process so that when we come back in May, what you're seeing lines up with your expectations. And so I just want to make sure that as much as we talk about some of the mechanics that are out there, that at a principle level, that, you know, number kind of first and foremost, focus on recruiting and retaining students, invest in the kind of core infrastructure, aligning programs with their kind of industry output or industry demand, managing operating efficiencies, and then kind of balancing that short-term uncertainty that we talked about and keeping an eye on 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. Did that lines up with this body's expectations?
I think it does. I think it's hard to argue with any of those. I mean, I think they're very relevant and well thought out. You know, I struggle in my mind with trying to prioritize them, I guess. And how do you communicate those? I mean, over time, the long-term sustainability issue actually is the bigger issue. State dependency, and you've got to focus on all those other ones if they're, that can't lose sight of them. So I don't know how to articulate that. But yeah, in general, I support the goals.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. So let me,
An action item, did you want to endorse, the committee to endorse those 5 goals?
yes,
So
yeah.
I would make that motion.
So let me read the staff recommendation, and I'll ask for a motion.
Okay.
So the staff recommendation is, staff recommends the committee approve the fiscal year 2020 budget development principles, as Brian just laid them out, those 5 principles, right? Staff recommends that the committee approve the fiscal year 2020 budget development principles as proposed in the docket. So I need a motion for that.
That's my motion.
All right, great. So we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I,
Was opposed? Any opposed? No. Okay, so with that, item is approved. Thank you, Brian. All right, so let's move on to the next item. It's 4.3, and that's a recommendation to the board to adopt a mid-year adjusted budget.
All right, we're good. Yeah, thank you.
Did it work? Did you turn it on?
Yeah. Well, I won't claim credit for that, innovation.
It's teamwork, it's teamwork.
But thank you. So, this is something we have not traditionally done in the past, is to bring back an adjusted budget to the committee. It's something that, the former chair of this august committee asked us to do, knowing that as we walked into this fiscal year, we set aside some resources for strategic investments, and I think there was an interest to have the leadership team and Dr. Nungi come back and say, all right, how are we spending those resources? Are we starting to make some of those investments to focus on the long-term sustainability of the institution? And so that's really what this adjusted budget does. It, one, lays out, here's our mid-year forecast where we expect to end the year in the current state, and then here are a series of investments that the administrative team is making and is proposing to make to drive the institution forward. So with that, I wanted to circle back to what were the original budget goals when we set the budget for this year, and those were balance the operating budget before strategic investment, to be able to get to a balanced budget, know that we may reach into our reserves, but that investment in reserves is about driving forward. That we would create the fiscal space for investments that align with the short-term action goals that at that point were proposed and then subsequently ratified by the board. And then lastly, that we ensure stability and continuity into this fiscal year while we kind of focus on keeping that momentum up. So I think the institution has been in a good place. We're moving in the right direction. We don't want to kind of shunt that progress. That was the original goals. As we have come back to the adjusted budget, you know, these will look largely similar, but remain within the bounds established by the original budget. So the board had approved the use of fund balance a little north of $2 million. We wanted to make sure that we stayed within those bounds originally established by the board. And so really that means shifting dollars around, not pulling additional dollars in, that we invest in alignment with the short-term action goals. So those are driving our investment decisions across the institution. And then we realign investments within the institution. Again, that's kind of another way of saying we want to stay within the board-approved bounds, but are realigning dollars across the institution. Just as a quick kind of reminder of what the short-term action goals were, I'll kind of scan through these, but increase reputational capital, increase enrollment, grow student and campus diversity, extend academic planning, so some of those classroom technology, essential studies, which is our general ed reform, kind of look into those, invest in talent, grow our culture of pride, make organizational improvements, that's business process, that's really increased entrepreneurialism within the institution that's driving some of that ownership into the department, building alumni and philanthropic relationships, and then leverage academic and industry partnerships. That's our guiding light. Those are the goals. That's what we're working towards. That's where we're driving investment into. With that, just a quick kind of process note. What we have done to bring forward an adjusted budget is taking the board-approved budget, incorporate the adjustments that were made after that. So as folks know, you set a budget on day 0, on day 1, it's off. You're just constantly making adjustments and moving through. So some of those kind of the larger pieces of those, new faculty hires that came in, either new positions that were approved after the budget was was brought forward. Or as we brought in new hires, many of them came in over what we had budgeted. So last year, I believe we landed 19 of 20 faculty searches, and traditionally our hit rate is very, very low. And so we making an effort to seal the deal and bring in the faculty that we need. Changes in the organizational chart is one-time both investments and some one-time savings that are incorporated in the adjusted budget. And then we incorporated some errors and omissions in our budget. And I just want to kind of underscore that a little bit. Last year, for the first time, we distributed the budgets out to the departments, pulled those back together. Some of those budgets never came back, and so they weren't incorporated. And it turns out later on, folks really wanted those budgets. And so we made some of those adjustments. Some of those were within the budget side of the house as we pulled things together. So those are errors made through the budget process. So a lot of those we've got them, we think, lined out for this year. We've been meeting with budget owners across the E&G, education in general, our kind of core operating budget, to establish where we expect to be on the expense side, on the revenue side. So working with Erica on the revenue side, working with the units on where their hires are, where there are gaps, what savings we expect. And then lastly, but most importantly, is president-driven investment prioritization process. That's working with the units to say, okay, where are those places through the year that we need to be making investments to drive the institution forward, not necessarily for this year, but for 1, 2, 3, 5 years down the road. With that, I will, if there are any questions on sort of process, take us now. If not, we'll move into kind of what the adjusted budget is and walk through a spreadsheet that I'll recognize as we were working on how to organize it. Couldn't get to something that was super easy to read, so my apologies, but I can walk through it. In the far left column, FY19 board adopted budget. This is what the board saw. The kind of, there should be one column at the bottom, and I left it off here because it's sort of a split table and maybe a little better in the packet. But the first column is, this is what the board approved last year on the operating side without the kind of strategic investment tranche, and that's on sort of another table, just a couple down, but included in the packet. The next column over under forecast, this is where, as of November, December, where we expect to end the year. And we've got some pretty positive deviations there. So we think tuition up a little bit, state appropriations down a little bit. We can talk through the details of those if you're interested, but not a significant or demonstrable change at that point. On the labor side, we've got some salary savings, some S&S and capital savings that we think we can book headed into the end of the year. So that really is the kind of forecast. The adjustment on the next side, this is the redistribution. This is taking some of those savings that we're anticipating in the forecast and then moving those up, and we can walk through in just a moment what some of those kind of major clusters of those adjustments are. So one, we expect through the end of the year to have to be up on the tuition side. So that gives us a little bit more freedom to invest through the year. And then on the expense side, you see about $2.8 million in changes. Those are actually some of those are broadly the distribution of the strategic investments that the board approved last year. So those are moving those into the appropriate categories.
We should also point out for the first time, we also booked a planned salary savings in the budget process, which typically we did not. That means we have $1 million less cushion in absorbing CBA this year.
And so that's something in our budget process. We have never booked salary savings in the past. This was the first year for us to say, okay, we know every year we're going to have some amount of vacancies and we're going to recapture the savings. This is the first time that we've ever started to book those, which gives us a much more accurate look at where we're likely to end up.
So I want to make sure I'm tracking. So top revenue line is based on this snapshot you're taking right now, you're projecting $64 million in revenue. And left unchanged, your operating expense picture you're projecting would be $61 million.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
So the adjustment you're making is to take some of that revenue and reallocate it back into strategic investment.
Yeah. these next two slides really walk through some of the things that I discussed there. On the revenue assumptions, tuition fees, we're expecting those to be coming up. That's a mix of both higher rates and some stronger than anticipated enrollment. Thank you, Erica. And then some reduced state allocation. So last year, this year came in a little bit below where we anticipated being on state allocation. And then there were some increased fee remissions, which are scholarships back to students, that's the cost of doing business in order for us to realize some of that enrollment. Our discount rate is relatively low, so we're in a pretty strong position there. This is kind of laying down the expense assumptions that we just discussed. I do want to highlight of that $2 million or $2.8 million in moving dollars around that was up there, where those are sitting. So the at the bottom, kind of the largest item, were some of those were the budget corrections. So that's pulling in. We had several folks that's pulling those budgets forward that should have been pulled forward. Accepting that, our largest investment is in new faculty hires. It's in negotiated salaries for our faculty members. Followed up very shortly by other academic investments. So that's in the academic management side. That's in equipment, CapEx for our department. So that is kind of primarily where we're spending resources. Some investments in change in staff salaries and new staff. Capital improvement, largely IT investments. So we made some pretty significant classroom upgrades. There are, as we heard earlier, more classroom upgrades that need to happen. And this is a place where we have not invested over the last 5, 6, 7 years to the level that we should. So we've got catch-up payments plus moving forward investments in organizational improvement, setting aside some resources for bargaining. So last year, our faculty elected to unionize. There are costs associated with managing the bargaining process, so we're setting aside resources in order to do that. And then some operating expenses. So this is kind of the broad categories of where we have made investments to date. Moving into the new investments, and this gets a little bit, I want to make sure that folks understand kind of the columns here. The board adopted budget, the new position, strategic funds, contingency funds, those have been moved up into their appropriate categories. So those are the pieces that have been moved into the salary S&S lines. The adjustments in the third to the right column, those are things that we're now bringing to the board and saying, these are items where we'd like to expend resources to make investments across the institution. And that's the $2.2 million. And those kind of come down in a couple areas. One is mid-year pay plan increases of merit pay, which is something that we have not done, at least to my understanding, in the last decade, if not more. And so we're putting dollars behind the merit process, which we think is an important step forward. Even if the dollars aren't large right now, it's important for us changing the culture of the institution.
Also, these two numbers are mid-year numbers, right? It's really half of the 2.5.
Dr. Nagier, the merit pay, how are the merit pay awards?
We are still developing the process. That is, the staff side, HR and our budget, we are looking at how the evaluations will take place, how the department supervisors, division supervisors will determine how to distribute it. On the faculty side, it's a little more involved because we are not used to doing it. There is a merit policy in our policies and procedures. So we just have to figure that out and request a verification by early February so that there is a process. Now, this is not anything contractual. We don't have a collective bargaining contract yet. Last year, I did announce the process and I said to honor my pledge, 2.5%.
Yeah, I would just suggest that we align on those 5.
This is Jessica. I just have a question or a comment. Since we haven't had merit pay award system yet, do we know how this is going to be impacted or integrated into the new pay equity legislation that now is being, implemented? How are we managing through that, and what's the structure look like?
That those maybe I can request of the legal counsel to kind of address it.
Okay.
Hey, this is Dave Groff. What I can tell you is although we have not done a comprehensive pay equity analysis yet, there is an exception in the pay equity law for bona fide merit systems. But it needs to be imposed or applied systematically across the institution, not just sort of individual merit decisions. That kind of approach, they would say, is just inequity. But as long as it's a formally adopted bona fide merit pay system, it's an exception to the pay equity concerns. So we can go ahead with the merit plan.
Did it answer the question, Trustee Gomez?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The largest single item in strategic investments or new investments is around enrollment management. This is a place where we have lined out a pretty detailed approach, and we think it's very important that we begin. We've already made some investments, and we want to continue rolling those up, and expect to see the benefits of those next year, but most importantly, the year after that and 10 years after that. Some of these are slow burn on the recruitment cycle. The ABA Clinic and Programming, this is a clinical program. It's applied behavioral analysis, which is really a wonderful program. There are two pieces of this. It's a graduate program or graduate certification, and a clinic operation. We have received some pretty significant donations that will offset some of these costs. We expect that there are more coming. We're in active discussion negotiation with some foundations to invest in standing up that program. We also believe that to be revenue positive over time. So this is kind of a best of both worlds. We've got to lay out some dollars, but with that comes a pretty structured increase in revenue. Some additional investments around labor relations routed through the general counsel's office. So again, this is related to bargaining. We have a match to some donor funds. So a donor stepped up and with about 2/3 or 70% of investment in a new softball field, and so the institution is making investment around that. So this is kind of our portion of that investment, some investments in marketing, and then some additional dollars for the president's kind of discretionary fund so that he can make investments throughout the year. Has a bit of a war chest. So those are an overview of the strategic investments. And with that, I will turn it back to Dr. Nagy to make the discussion.
One of the things I would point out is even though in the original budget, between the strategic investment and contingency, there was slightly north of $1 million. By salary savings, by reshifting, we are really investing almost $2 million in strategic activities and just expensing it away in regular activities. The committee will agree that the monies are being used wisely for the future of these.
Okay, so Brian, can we go back to the adjusted budget table? Okay.
And it may be easy or kind of best described on page 15 of the docket as kind of all the tables together.
Yeah, that one. Do you have, I'm looking at the total net, the bottom line. Yeah, the bottom line budget. Do you have it? Yeah, it's right. Okay, that one, that's fine. So when we approved the fiscal year budget that was adopted, you had the column on the left, 2,185,968. That's a deficit budget that we approved. That's the full board approved last year. When was that? May. Okay, and so I know we had some really thoughtful discussions on the fact that we are approving the budget. But with the adjustments that we're making here, if you look to the far right column, the adjusted budget is still a deficit budget, but it's somewhat lower. So we're still on track to maintaining the budget that was approved. So these decisions that we're making are good decisions that at least we're going in the right direction, even though we're still carrying a deficit budget.
I'm glad you brought it up. Even last year, in fiscal year 18, the board, we were trying to approve a deficit budget like this. But we weren't prepared to invest in big strategic activities at the time. So the money wasn't just spent away, we ended the year in black. I think, first of all, that's why this is important for the board to say it right now, that at the end of the year, it's very unlikely we are going to end in black again until we get a jackpot somewhere.
Right.
Which is unlikely between now and the end of the year, and that the money is being used strategically. As a matter of fact, we are bringing other savings into strategic so that we can make some bold investments in government and so on. So to some extent, we want to be upfront with the board that be prepared to see a negative balance at the end of the year. Partly because we also booked $1 million salary savings in the original budget as to work, even within our budget. And there was, I sensed there was an opinion evolving on campus. Well, you all say it is a negative budget, somehow it's going to work out at the end of the year. I want our people to know within the campus community also that good investments are being made, and there's not a lot of numbers tucked in somewhere, somehow it's going to work out at the end. You need to be conscious of it.
So it's one thing to have a deficit budget where you're spending in what we call one-time expenditures, like softball. Completely different thing to take that deficit budget and invest in things that are going to repeat as operating expenses going forward. And it looks to me as though it's a misunderstanding the categories that about half of that $2 million deficit falls into that category. Would that be accurate, roughly?
Yep.
I answer that? Yeah. It's a correct observation. But part of this permanent adjustment, for example, the strategic enrollment management. As you may recall, there was a discussion in the last board meeting that roughly translates to about 90 to 100 new students. So there is also a revenue expectation associated with these things. Even we have reason to believe we are going to hit those targets. One can never predict the future, but Erica has an exciting presentation to show what kind of response she has been able to generate with the investments we are making. So yeah, you are completely correct. Those are permanent things. And even to the executive staff last week, I even presented even a more compact version of this to show, well, we have additional expenses like in the PERS and tech costs, the additional $2 million that may come our way. So that's the reason I think people have to be aware of what are our revenue streams, what are our cost streams. We just cannot say what happened here. So making them aware, but both the ABA clinic and the strategic enrollment management, they have revenues associated.
Which should offset your operating expenses that you're
Going
spending.
forward. Yeah. Hopefully we will exceed them, so we will have additional.
Your observation is spot on. It is, I think, the question to ask. The physician, kind of the framework that I've looked at where we are as an institution is we have kind of two discrete options. One of those is recognition, state funding, whether it's this biennial or next, at some point the state will walk into a recession and start to come down. Which means we've got to we have to be growing top line revenue, top line earned revenue. That's the combination of tuition rate, less discount, and number of students. And I think we're in a place where our options are either hunker down as an institution, concentrate on efficiency, which means we've got to move our student-faculty ratios up, cut down on extraneous costs, recognize a no-growth scenario, and manage through. The other option is you jump over the cliff. And so you make investments on the front end. If you believe that you can drive top-line revenue to step away from the state side, then you run full steam, right? If you're going to jump over the gas, you have to be running fast. There's a combination of two, where you recognize that there are places where we can drive efficiency over time to either bring down the cost in absolute terms, or bring down the cost in relative terms to revenue. And I think that's where, to some extent, we have to do. My position on this, or my thinking is, we have to do both of those. And part of that is, I've got a pretty strong faith that we can grow our student base. I think we've underinvested in our recruitment retention side over time, so I think we've got room there, and that's what a lot of these investments are around. There also is room on the efficiency side, so we've got to be managing that gap too.
Also, in growing the student body, it's not only recruitment, it is also better retention. Our dean, I want to recognize, he is new to Oregon Tech, but even in the last few months, he has created more awareness within his college about retaining more students. By state metrics, we do well. When the freshmen come, the state tends to track a small percentage of our student body. But we see a lot more opportunities in retaining the students that come into Oregon Tech, which means some of the investments going to better advising, better retention approaches. So we get to keep more students, not grow the body only with recruitment, but also recruitment and retention. And of course, the more we graduate, that's going to improve our state funding. That's why the state funding model is built based on degrees awarded. So it's a multi-dimensional.
Yeah, yes, and I agree, that definitely has a return. We may hear more of this later, but even on the student recruitment, there's a difference between, spending money on marketing and publicity and education versus hiring people to go out, be on the streets. How is that splitting?
Let me answer that. So the majority of that investment is in funds that we can always pull back should enrollment split. Very little is dedicated to hiring new staff.
You can watch your return and then decide where to pull the lever. Okay.
Jessica, did you have a question?
More of just a comment on the strategy, Brian, that you were talking about. I think, we've gone so long with some of the investment in the infrastructure for our Klamath Falls campus and sort of the equipment infrastructure for real instruction, that I think it's a better strategy to invest heavy in that now, knowing that eventually we're going to have a recession, and then be competitive when we have a lot of people returning to higher ed for skill building, to kind of capture that next job, right? So I think, and knowing that later on we're going to have to really focus on driving efficiency as we kind of work through that problem. But I think the timing for that may still work out okay, because if we don't see a recession, let's say it's 2 years out, that's actually pretty reasonable timing, I think, for what we have going on, depending on how good our execution is.
I wholeheartedly agree and appreciate that. We have, with bringing on the new CEET, with that we will have the physical capacity in Klamath Falls to grow pretty soon. And having the academic capacity and management, that's something with Kaiser that he's doing really well to bring some of those pieces in line. And then continue to make investments on the classroom IT side, the physical campus appearance, the place where we have underinvested. By managing those, I think we'll be very well positioned as enrollments come up, both because of our efforts and because as you walk into a recession, higher ed's a counter-cyclical good, so we'll start to see a natural increase because of that.
Right, which will drive top line revenue, and then, you know, the other thing that's in our favor is the makeup of our student body is not necessarily traditional, right? And so, you know, when you have a dip in the economy, we're sort of the natural fit for capturing that student body. And then if we also focus on, you know, working that pipeline out of high school, we're gonna be in reasonable shape.
But also, Brian, I think kind of in line with the comments that Jessica just made in looking at, let's look at the Klamath Falls campus, because I'm involved in facilities end of it. We should also, and you and I talked about this, is focusing on deferred maintenance items as well, and trying to be timely in looking at those if you can now, sooner rather than later, because before they get any worse. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have some advantage in a bond that was approved a couple of years ago, $5 million for campus infrastructure. And so the goal that we have, that $5 million won't cover all of it, but is with that $5 million deferred maintenance dollars from the state, or the sort of more consistent deferred maintenance dollars, to be taking care of everything that you dig up, fix, and then cover again, so that we have the basic footprint and infrastructure on campus in a ready and serviceable condition. And then additional dollars as they come in or as we spend them are visible. And so I think that's been some of the frustration for our faculty is, as much as we have dollars going out the door on capital investment, a lot of it you never see. And so we've got to, because we've allowed that to lag over time, we've got to do the catch up, which is, but that is, we've done a deferred maintenance and equipment study, which is allowing us to prioritize some of those investments, cut down on some of the emergency issues that have been plaguing us over the last couple of years, get in front of those a little bit. But I think that's spot on. One of my goals is, we certainly won't get deferred maintenance to zero,
Right.
but get the critical infrastructure systems fully functioning and operational, and that's true on the facility side. That is true on IT as it comes over to report under F&A. That's the place where we've got to get what I think of as core infrastructure ready, running, and operational.
Yeah, so I think your strategy for addressing deferred maintenance is a good one. You have a plan for how to deal with that. The Klamath Falls campus is old, and we're starting to see some of the things that pop up when you have an older facility like that. And just for Trustee Starr's information, we have our facilities manager that comes to these meetings and he gives an update on the capital program, and he talks about, and one of the things that he reports on is a list of deferred maintenance items. So that should happen at our next meeting. Okay. Any other questions for this item?
Yeah, I've got another one for Brian, sorry.
Sure, no?
So when we run a deficit, do we pull out of the investments? Is that how we balance it?
Yeah.
So the 22 million we have?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's how cash balances our investment.
Okay.
We like to keep cash or cash equivalents of at least 2 months of operating expenses on hand. And we, over time, I think, can increase our risk appetite a little bit on the investment and cash management side, but that's new to us, and so we're easing our toes into it.
Okay.
Okay, so for this action item, we're on 4.3. Let me read the staff recommendation. We need a motion. So for item 4.3, recommendation of the board to adopt fiscal year 2019 mid-year adjusted budget. The staff recommendation is, staff recommends the committee support the proposed fiscal year 2019 mid-year budget adjustment as outlined in the docket, and recommends adoption to the full board of trustees. Need a motion? Any second? Okay. So,
Will you second that, Trustee Gomez?
Sure, second.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So that, item is approved. Thank you, trustees. Okay. So we'll move to the next item on the agenda, that's 4.4. And that is the recommendation to the board to adopt a special tuition rate for Boeing. That's correct.
We have Professor Addison is on, right?
Okay, so this is, Chair Steve Addison. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Go ahead.
Oh, so your details. The Boeing program for IT, as you know, has been in existence for about 20 years now. It's our 20th year of operation. We are a curious outlier in that we teach Washington State students in Washington State, but we are an Oregon State institution. We therefore have no established tuition rate in the way that the main campus does have. What we do have is an agreed tuition rate, or a tuition rate that we tell Boeing that we charge them on a per credit basis, and they just pay up happily each year. It's great. There has been no change, as the topic will tell you, there's been no change to the tuition rate that we charge Boeing for the last 9 or 10 years. Not quite sure why that's happened, but I'm somewhat newer to the situation than that. But it's becoming increasingly apparent that we need to bump up our tuition rate slightly to, particularly to help us pay a more competitive rate for adjunct faculty in the area. The rate we establish is established in 2 ways. One is historical data where we are, but also we look at the rate that's charged by other private institutions in the Seattle area, so we obviously can't compete against state subsidized entities. What we are proposing, which will help us address the issues of adjunct faculty pay and also make the money that we return to the university somewhat better, is a 5.5% increase for this year. That's the proposal. Any questions?
Okay, so Brian, the question I had was, just the timing. Can you talk about the timing on why this is coming up now, tuition increase, kind of like in the middle of, we will have a tuition discussion later, but talk to us about the timing on that.
You know, I would actually refer to Steve. I can talk a little bit. Well, I would refer to Steve, who has the relationships with Boeing, with the
Right.
which I think is driving the timing question.
So the original proposal actually went forward about a quarter ago, and we kind of missed the deadline for the last trustees meeting. We're not locked to an academic year, and we teach all 4 quarters, and so we're not locked to an academic year in the same way as the rest of the university. But none of our students receive federal financial aid. Everything is paid for directly by Boeing, so it's not tied to any federal calendar of any kind. We can actually change the rate any time we wish.
So this would allow them to plan better the ratio for students to faculty, the number of sections offered is a completely different pipeline. And this is not influenced by any state of Oregon. This is completely independent. If at all the state wants to pay attention, the only thing they may pay attention to is that the state resources are not used unreasonably in running it outside the state of Oregon. Is it fair to say?
What are the private comparables? So when we take a look at the proposal here, where is the IT at?
I'm not sure I included them in there, but we're about comparable with Seattle University.
I mean, from my perspective, and I don't know if I've got a conflict in this or not, but I work for Boeing. I'm very familiar with the programs and the convenience of the programs and the timing of the programs and the locations of the programs. And I I mean, for the life of me, when I read through this thing, I did not understand why we didn't charge a premium for those conveniences, location. You know, it doesn't make sense that we would charge less.
We're effectively charging a premium over what the students could get at the University of Washington. So if they went to the University of Washington, which is state subsidized, they would be paying less. However, they would have to go on University of Washington time frame and be part of a larger class, and we would be customizing the class in the same way. The other issue as well, and this has changed over the years, is the way that federal taxes are applied. Our students do end up paying some out-of-pocket costs, which can amount to a couple of $1,000s a year, because of the way federal taxes are levied on their education subsidy, the LTP money.
Just when this was brought to my attention, I was surprised it hasn't been adjusted for so long. We decided we need to get this going instead of waiting for everything else all in place, which is really not, I mean, to this conversation. The rest of the tuition process has nothing to do with it.
Normally, one of the aspects of tuition adjustments you would consider is whether or not it drives students' ability to pay, right? That's not the issue here, but is there a budget issue with Boeing? I mean,
No.
it's not driving their decision making if we do this either, right?
No, the biggest impact would be what Steve said around the change in the treatment of taxes. Because years ago, any additional education, if you didn't get taxed on it, now you have to be at a certain level within Boeing to not get taxed. So most of these folks are probably seeing this on their W-2s.
I think it's a sort of a general, this is a great example of what having kind of a nimble service offering and looking for areas that other institutions have overlooked, and it's a place, and maybe even outside of Boeing and the mechanical manufacturing engineering process, but it's a great example of allowing our faculty to be pretty innovative, look at where there's gaps and needs in the education side and where you can charge a premium. We've done that here. I think there are other companies for us to do it. Dr. Mivey has been pretty focused on some of these things.
We are working with Lake Washington Institute of Technology in creating additional programs on the campus, but in the process, they can get approvals from the actual expansion Washington Student Advocacy Council, or WASAC it's called, right, Steve? To get that permission to offer to other students. Right now, that body has approved us to offer programming only to students from Boeing. The Boeing executive protocols, according to them, Boeing doesn't object to us including other industry students, but right now the state of Washington has not approved us to teach anyone else. So we are exploring other possibilities so we can increase our outreach to industry. It's more than revenue. It's really us wanting to be an university. It connects us much more to those organizations. And obviously, many of them are going to have operations in Oregon.
So let me ask a question then, looking in the direction. Why was 5.5% arrived at instead of something higher?
Digging back through the historical documents, there was a document signed some years ago, which is no longer in effect, but it gives some guidance. But the document that was signed a few years ago limited any annual rise to about 6%, to a maximum of 6%. Now, as I say, that document is no longer in effect, but our feeling has been that to bump up the numbers more than about 5.5% this year, in 1 year, might start raising a few eyebrows. And I would anticipate we would come back next year with another small increase as well to start ticking it up a little bit more as well. Also, the other reason why 5.5 was chosen rather than 5.8 or 5.7 was the per credit rate that students would see would go up by 2 digits, not 3 digits.
Thank you.
I mean, I would suggest that we look at some sort of an index with what our peer community is up there and put it in as a normal. Yep. Instead of bringing these forward.
And we'll embed these in the future in our normal tuition setting process, and then this wouldn't be called out so separately, we end up having 20 different lines where we can, for this is one that we're. And we'll work with Steve. Find out.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So the other thing that I noticed on this was the enrollment. So are we using the strategic enrollment management activities this as well? Or what are we doing?
Right now, we are not, it has been largely Steve and his fellow faculty working with the executives inside. And Steve has already identified, he has been in this role, Steve, what, a couple of years now? Yes, and we are beginning to see the shift on programmatic preferences, technology versus engineering, so we are also looking at other possibilities, what is of interest to growing employees. So I want to thank Steve. In the short time, he is beginning to take a more active role, rather than simply offering what we are always used to offering. On the other day, I was speaking with the electrical engineering chair, and looks like she and Steve were talking. I mean, there may be things are electromechanical anymore. There is nothing purely mechanical. So there may be other opportunities here we should actively explore.
Additive and automation and analytics and all those other,
So Brian, this item, along with the item previously, this is, so if we approve this item, it is a recommendation that goes to the full board for adoption of the tuition increase, correct? So, if there are any questions at the full board, do we need Steve available to answer any questions, or how should we cover that?
I think we make sure either Steve is available or to the extent that I can answer questions.
Okay. Just think.
Yep. Steve, I'll follow up with timing. So you know that you've got that. It'll be later this afternoon, but I'll shoot you an email or give you a call as soon as we're done here.
Okay, no problem.
Any other questions? Let me read the staff recommendation for this item 4.4. Staff recommends, the committee recommend to the board adoption of the proposed special tuition rate increase for the Seattle Bowling Program beginning in summer term 2019 as described in the docket. I need a motion.
I'll move.
And a second? Great. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So that item is approved. Thank you, trustees. And thank you, Steve.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is 4.5, acceptance of the annual financial and single item audit report. Let me just start off by saying, when Dr. Sliwa was the chair of this committee, he also served, so again, just for Trustee Starr, the Finance and Facilities Committee also sits as the audit committee. So we work with the auditors for internal and external audits. And when Dr. Sliwa was on this committee, he served as the audit and budget liaison. So that's any concerns, questions that came up that the auditors had to reach out to one of the trustees. That was his role. Now that Dr. Sliwa is no longer on the board, I will take over as the audit and budget liaison for now. I mean, we'll see if that changes. But so I just want to state for the record that I will be the liaison for the audit and budget exercises for this committee. Like I said, if that changes, I anticipate that will change, but I just want to state that for the record. Okay, so with that, Again, 4.5, acceptance of the annual financial and CMO report. And that is going to be given by Jean Bouchon. Eugene?
I'm Jean.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet
Thank
you in
so
person.
much
We
for
talked
yes, we have. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Of
Go ahead.
course. Are we ready?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And greetings, good morning. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Jean Bouchon. I am the engagement principal for the Oregon Technic External Audit. Today, I'm going to walk you through a slide presentation summarizing the results of our audit procedures. Of course, I have a nice agenda and some topics we want to cover, but feel free to jump in anytime to ask any questions that you may have. I am going to pull up your board docket so that I am seeing the same thing that you're seeing as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So a couple things I want to make sure we understand what the scope of our procedures were. And then I'll remind everybody kind of during that process what an audit is and what an audit is not, an external audit of your financial statements and what that included. After I go through the results of the audit, I'm going to go through some required communications of governance. Given your role, I have to have some communications with you. Were there any audit difficulties? Were there any audit adjustments? Were there any conversations with management that were outside the scope of the audit? So I'll walk you through those required communications. At the end of this, I have some content for you. We probably won't have a lot of time to dive into that today as it relates to upcoming industry standards and changes in reporting. I would encourage you, we have a upcoming higher education virtual conference that will be diving more into these higher education industry topics, and you're more than welcome to. But this will just be a brief overview of some of those things that we'll be discussing.
Do you need more room? I don't want your
You
computer
know,
to fall
I
off.
think I'm okay. I do.
You
I
have
do.
like 6 inches.
Right, okay, perfect. Oh, all right, very good. I think the dual, computer may, uh-oh, did I hit something? Sorry. I probably hit something and I apologize.
Take it away from me.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so, real quickly, thanks to me, bye. Well, I'll go back. Is that slide 2? Yeah, okay, great.
Or forward one more.
There we go. Perfect. All right. So just to remind everybody about what the scope of our audit was and our responsibility in accordance with auditing standards. We basically focused our procedures in 2 buckets. Your financial statements, which you all have a copy in front of you today, and our job there is to tell the reader, are the financial statements free from material misstatement? And then we also perform what's called the single audit report. You receive about almost $29 million in federal dollars, okay? Of that, $28 million relates to student financial aid. And so under federal regulations, we are required to test your student financial aid program. And so that's kind of that's the 2 buckets that we concentrated our procedures over. Talking a little bit about that financial statement audit, we always like to remind governance what our responsibilities are. We're not coming in to do a forensic audit, over your procurement cards, right? Our job is to tell the reader those financial statements that you have in front of you, are those free from material misstatement? Are they free from material misstatement due to error? Are they free from material misstatement due to fraud? Or are they free from material misstatement due to non-compliance? And so based upon those 3 risk buckets, we design our audit procedures. We start our audit back in the spring and summer time frame where we test certain internal controls. Keep in mind, we don't opine on your internal controls. We opine on your numbers. We opine on your footnotes. For your internal controls, what we do is we test what we consider key internal controls of ensuring data is reaching your financial statements correctly. So whether it's your financial reporting controls, your payroll controls, your general disbursement controls, revenue, tuition controls, those controls that are feeding directly into those financial statements are where we spend our time. And when and if we were to identify things called significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, we report those to you, okay? Please don't look at your auditors as part of your internal control system, right? Your auditor management is responsible for the internal controls. Our job is to report any deficiencies that we identify during that process, right? Okay, so now that we've kind of talked a little bit about what our role is in auditing your financial statements, let's go over the results of those. So, in summary, in fact, if you want to open up the financial statements that you have in front of you, On pages 8 and 9 of that document is our opinion. And so this summarizes the results, and essentially what it's telling readers, we believe your financial statements are free from material misstatement. We believe that these are materially correct, okay? This particular document highlights and reminds everybody what management's responsibilities are and what our responsibilities were. Keep in mind, these are management financial statements, not CLAs, right? But again, an unmodified opinion of your financial statements. Now, we did find some deficiencies during our process, and when I go over the single audit process, I'd like to highlight those to you, okay? So let's walk through the financial statements real quickly. You hit the wrong arrow. Okay, when we take a look at our financial statements, if you go ahead and flip to page 10, this is the start of your management discussion and analysis. This will give you a summary of information of what changed from year to year, okay? Management takes some time, it analyzes these numbers and provides variance information. I wasn't going to spend a lot of time here, but if you ever need a quick snapshot, this is a great place to go. Now, if you go ahead and flip to page 20, I would like to focus on a couple of things that of emphasis or things that change. On page 20, this is your statement of net position. Essentially, in layman's terms, this is your balance sheet, your assets and your liabilities owed as of the fiscal year end that we were auditing. A couple of things that I will highlight for those who have been on this committee in the past. We're now in year 4 of GASB 68. GASB 68 was the accounting standard where we had to take your proportionate share of the PERS liability and put that on your books, okay? So if you go about 2/3 down the statement under liabilities, non-current liabilities, you're going to see that net pension liability that continues to be on there. That's not new, but some good news is we do have a slight decrease there from the $17 million to $16.7 million. Okay, basically the overall net pension liability PERS went down due to more positive investment results primarily, but again, this is a large liability that continues to be on your on that balance sheet. Now, the one thing that did change, I'd like you to look for, I believe it's right below there, that your OPEB liability, okay? You're going to see that changed and it increased up to about $1.5 million, okay? That was simply due to an accounting change. In this fiscal year, you implemented GASB 75 along with all the other public institutions across the country. And now you're having to put your proportionate share of the PERS retiree health care benefits on your books. So before it was a pension proportionate share, now it's their health care benefits that are provided to retirees, that proportionate share. Now, obviously not as large as our net pension liability asset, but it's the same concept. So keep in mind, that's why those numbers aren't comparable from last year to this year. It's because of that implementation. One additional change for the year was the termination of the Perkins Revolving Loan Program, okay? So the Perkins Revolving Loan Program is a federal program that was ended and no new loans after 6/30/2018, okay, last congressional session. This thing has been on its deathbed for many years, and it finally was not approved moving forward. And so now what the Department of Education has done is it's talked about, okay, let's start talking to schools about how we get our portion of this revolving loan program back. So in summary, the way this used to work is back in the 90s or before and prior, maybe even some in the early 2000s, the federal government would give you, let's say, 75 cents, and you'd have to put in a quarter. So it was a 75-25 split. Sometimes that changed a little bit, 80-20, et cetera, but essentially the largest part of that revolving loan program was the federal government, right? And so what they're saying is now that this program is ending, as you get that dollar back from the student, we want our 75 cents back, okay? So what we've done is now reported that federal portion, what used to be called restricted equity, restricted net position, we've now said, no, this is now a liability. We now, as we get this dollar back, we owe that back. There's a new liability on your balance sheet. You can't see it on the face, it's in your long-term liabilities, but you can see it distinctly in note 9, and in a bit, I'll show you where that loss is on the income statement, okay? All right, let's go ahead and take a look at, page 22. As you flip to page 22, you're gonna see the foundation statement. Keep in mind, we do not audit those are audited by other auditors. We get their audit report, we rely on that, we found no issues with the information that we. Okay, so on page 22, this is your statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. This shows the changes, with a positive $3 million increase, okay? So talk to me, Dean, about, okay, what happened during the year. A couple of things that you're gonna see is that your operating revenues were fairly consistent from year to year. You did have an increase in your tuition, which was a combination of both a slight enrollment and fee increase last year. Your state grants did go up too. That was an increase from your the center the OBDE grant. So that was the slight increase there. Now, when you take a look at your operating expenses, your operating revenues minus your operating expenses, you're going to have an operating loss. Okay. I tell this to all my boards: don't be alarmed. You're not going to pick up a set of public university financial statements. I've never seen one that has anything but an operating loss. And that's because GASB tells us that certain revenues that we use for operating are down in non-operating. So our Pell revenues, our state appropriations, those types of revenues that we obviously use for operations, GASB tells us we have to call those non-operating, okay, because they're not coming from the consumer. And so, so what you're going to see below are those grants and monies that help us have a positive increase in our net position during the year. Now, keep in mind, a large portion of that increase is due to your capital grants. Those are your 11Q bond monies that come from the state, okay? And so that's going to be like this over the years. You can't assume that you're going to get that $10 million every year, right? So keep in mind that that is a large part of that increase this year. Now, the remainder of this report are your footnotes. It just provides more information on, okay, what happened with our capital assets this year. The assets went up due to, infrastructure and Cornet Hall additions, et cetera. The notes are going to tell you more about the PERS liability. There's probably 15 pages talking to you about that net pension liability and actuarial assumptions and things that if you need help going to sleep, it's okay. So I was not planning to go, due to time and your schedule, I was not planning to go into great detail of those footnotes, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody had any.
You referenced footnote 9.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, footnote 9 right here. You're right there.
Yeah.
So that's on page 36, and what you're going to see, and then what you're going to see is that new Perkins loan liability started off with a 0, you see, and then there's that $1.7 million coming on your book. And I did fail to mention on page 22, down in the non-operating activity, you're going to see that $1.7 million loss. So again, that's a one-year type loss that happened in 2018 that you're not going to see again going forward.
Paid to the Department of Education.
That will be paid over time.
It is over time.
Over time, over the next 10 years.
You're booking it once and then.
Exactly.
It'll be as we collect it.
Exactly.
We'll remit that.
Exactly. And just to give a little bit of information on that, schools are having to make a decision, right? So you have this loan portfolio that you're trying to collect on, okay? So the decision is, why don't I just give the whole loan portfolio to the Department of Ed and let them deal with the headache versus us? Well, there's a reason. If you turn over that full portfolio, you lose your 25 cents. You lose that quarter, of the fund. They get to keep everything. And so what some schools are saying is, you know what, they can have that quarter because the person I'm paying or a lot of people use third-party administrators to run the program. I'm paying more for this person to run this program than I'll get back. So it is a decision-making process. Right now, a lot of schools are acting as if like Oregon Tech and continuing to monitor and facilitate the program. I think probably down the road, once that 25 cents, starts getting smaller and smaller, that you may want to say, hey, it's time to liquidate the whole portfolio.
And we use a third-party servicer, so we do have some interaction with them. Usually this is disgruntled, they call us,
Right.
and we hand it back to the servicer. But
doing some
Have that
analysis.
conversation,
Yeah.
and we'll
Yeah.
continue to have that conversation.
Yeah, so have you analyzed turning it over to the department?
We've had conversations on it, we haven't really kind of dug in on it, I suspect at some point,
Yeah.
particularly as it extends out,
Right,
you know, the quality of the asset will decline, and then,
dramatically.
yeah.
Exactly, because you're gonna collect on those collectible loans,
Yeah, that's
right?
Right.
Yeah, so-
Well, hanging fruit first.
Right, yeah. All right. Any other questions on the financial statement before we move into the single audit? Okay, I am going to now take you to your board docket because the single audit is actually in your board docket and it's found on, page 28, perhaps PDF page 29, but the board docket number is on page 28. Okay, so the single audit, is comprised of various components that I'm about to walk you through. And essentially, these are the results, not only of what did we find in our financial statement audit, but what did we find as it relates to the audit of your student financial aid program, okay? So what I'd like to do is maybe, there's two reports in that. The first one is reporting our results in the financial statement portion of the audit. The second report is then, focusing on what we found in the compliance portion of the audit. But what I'd like to focus on, what these reports are referring to. And they're referring to a matter of 5 different findings. And so for the first bucket, let's talk about the financial reporting. And those start on page 38 of the board docket. Okay, so we found 3 items. The first one is actually a repeat from prior years that we expect will go away in 2019. In fact, this one's been here for a couple of years, and the reason it's been here for a couple of years, per discussion with the university, is the fact that when we have the banner upgrade, which is, I think it's going live. Yeah,
It's
perfect.
live and we're.
Yeah, there we go. And so this will no longer, this control weakness will no longer be here. And what it is programmers having capabilities of moving their own changes in production. And what you want to do is you don't want someone to be able to change part of your IT system and go live with that, because they could have an error in it, they may not have properly tested it. And we're not saying that anybody did, in fact, we confirmed that they didn't, but what we're saying is you should not have that capability. You should segregate those duties. And per conversation with the IT team, that will be the case with this new banner upgrade, okay? And that has always been their response, okay? So the next item, recommendation number 2, this one has to do with some elements noted in the payroll process, okay? Now within this particular, let me actually get there. Within this, there are several elements of items that we feel the university can strengthen as it relates to their payroll process. Okay, the bullets start at the bottom of page 38 and go into page 39. I know Trustee Jones and I had this conversation, but first of all, we found some payments to some employees that happened after they left the school, or the contract was not live, okay? There were various reasonings why we were told, like, the HR and payroll departments weren't timely notified of some of these contracts no longer being active, or the employee leaving. We also noted that there was various incorrect payments made to employees. My understanding of this is that some employees got some pay raises during the year. And when they implemented the pay raises, they were implemented incorrectly. And so those employees had to pay back some of those monies. The third bullet there, employees weren't having their access removed on a timely basis. And lastly, this particular one is one that we've noticed in the past, but we need better controls over it. That there are 2 employees. This goes back to the segregation of duties issues, in that 2 employees have the ability to push the payroll process all the way through. You want that segregated, especially at a university of your size, is that you don't want the same person being able to put an employee in the system, change their pay rate, and process payroll, set up direct deposit. Because the risk is, hey, I'll change my own pay, I'll process this paycheck, right? And so essentially what we're recommending is that, hey, guys, let's look at this, let's learn from this, let's figure out what happened, and let's make sure that these types of things aren't happening again. All right. Any questions on recommendation number 2? Okay, recommendation number 3. This one, whereas is recommendation is more, systemic, let's address controls. This particular one was a one-time instance, and I feel like we can get handled. But essentially what happened is last year was the OMIC membership revenue. We had a lot of conversation, as it relates to, how should this membership revenue be recognized, upfront or over the term of the membership? Last year, it was the university's representation that, hey, this should be recognized up front because we're not providing ongoing benefits, because typically membership revenue is recognized along the membership term because you're providing membership services for the fee that they pay. Last year, they said, no, we represent that all the qualifications for revenue recognition are met up front. This year they said, no, we now believe that it should be recognized ratably over the membership. Our understanding is that there's a new person over the OMIC, and he had a better sense of what this membership entailed. And so as a result, we said, okay, you can change your revenue, but guys, we need a policy going forward. Anytime you have a new revenue stream, you need to consistently report revenues from year to year. Why? Why does it matter? Well, you can, and this is not what's going on in the case, but you can manage your bottom line by changing your revenue policy from year to year, right? Oh, I'm going to recognize it all this year because I need a better result on my bottom line this year. Oh, this year we have a healthy bottom line, so I'm going to recognize this rapidly. I'm not saying that's what's going on, but that's why you have to be consistent with your revenue recognition from year to year, okay? And so basically we just said, hey guys, anytime you have a new revenue stream, let's get a policy in place so that as we have turnover, let's make sure we fully vetted how this revenue should be reported. So those were the 3 items that relate to financial reporting. Before I move into testing of federal programs, any questions?
So that treatment of the OMIC revenue is going to result in a need to restate.
Great question. Great question. When I go over that governance letter, I want to have a past adjustment. And the past adjustment is that we're not restating. Yeah, because it wasn't material enough to require restating. Had it been larger, we may have had to restate it. Great question. Okay. All right, so let's move into chatting a little bit about the federal programs. As I mentioned, I think you guys received like $28.8 million in federal dollars, and 28.6 of that is due to financial aid. So that is where we focus the bulk of our time. We did have one finding over the student financial aid, and this has to do with the return of Title IV. When a student drops out, they have pulled out aid from the federal government. Part of that has to be returned to the Department of Education because it quote unquote wasn't earned, right? And so there is a very complex process of the amount of money that has to be returned to the Department of Education. And that's called the return of Title IV process. From the time you determine that a student has withdrawn to the time that the monies are due to the federal government, it's pretty tight, it's 45 days. Yeah. And so we did find a few examples of instances where it was outside the 45 days. Should you be concerned? I would say no. I would say if you see this finding again next year, yes. This is not something that's been repeating. So let's just recommend that the school put the proper controls in place to make sure we're meeting that 45. This particular finding starts to become an issue with the Department of Education when it's repeated and repeated and repeated. We have another client within the state that this issue was not resolved within a year period, and the department came in. And that's what you want to avoid, right? So.
Is that just making sure we recognize we have 45 days to respond and do it within that time frame?
Right, yeah. And making sure you have a process in place that identifies the withdrawal process and when a student stops attending. And there's best practices across the country that you can probably reach out to other organizations to make sure you have those practices.
So that's something that you're looking at, Brian?
Yeah, and we have, for each of these, we have folks that own, okay, your job is to solve this one, your job is to solve this one. Revenue recognition, that's on me, so I'm working with the DAO and others to deal with that. This is when it goes to Tracy Lehman, who's our financial aid director, and reporting to her.
All right, and so the very last one has to do with, the cash management process. And this one actually has to do with your other federal dollars. And, so essentially what the federal government says is, we'll give you the dollar after you spend it. The federal government's not gonna give you their money, say, hey, sit on this, earn interest, pay out, and then spend it, right? Well, what happened was during the year, we found that the university was actually drawing down based upon budget or project budget versus expenditures. And so they overdrew about $150,000 that ultimately had to be returned. Okay, and so even though this didn't have to do with the student financial aid program because we were made aware of it over these other monies, we have to report it and say, hey guys, let's make sure we're following federal requirements of how we pull the money down. All right. Any questions on the single audit report?
On that last one, board's aware, this is something that we internally discovered and realized we had a pretty
Yes.
significant problem.
Yes.
And we have changed
Yes.
completely the grant management process. And so working through that, then we have taken the drawdowns and accounting side of that and moved it into our business office controller's
Yes.
office. And then left the grant management and the get grants and work with the principal investigators into our sponsored projects office so that we have a much more professional and rigorous approach to the way we're dealing with the money side of the equation.
That's exactly right, Brian. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, before I move on to the next slide, just real quickly, we also issued to management, and it is included in your board docket and it's at, your board docket page 26, PDF page 27, a management letter. These are items that actually we don't have to report to you, but we just find it good practice and transparency to report these items. These are considered management letter items. These are considered either a deficiency, so below that significant deficiency level, or other matters. This first one we consider a significant deficiency, a deficiency that will probably rise to a significant deficiency next year. But this one is, the Uniform Grant Guidance came out a couple of years ago, and they implemented this pretty detailed procurement requirement for purchasing with federal dollars. And this became required as of July 1, 2018. Let me make sure I get it. So fiscal year 2019. During our interviews on campus, we found out that Oregon Tech had not yet implemented this procurement policy. This applies to a very small subset of your dollars. Again, you get about $200,000 in federal dollars that aren't in the financial aid. But at the same time, they're federal dollars, and so you have to follow this. And so we know for part of FY19, this policy was not in place. So it's a management letter saying, hey, let's get this adopted as soon as possible. The next two are especially the next one is just more of an other matter, fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. We know very well that you guys have this process in place. We do interviews across campus, and during some of those interviews, it didn't seem like people truly understood their responsibility and what the process was as it relates to this. And so all we're saying is maybe provide some training, some more communication. Best practices that we see at other universities are an annual reminder email or, hey, employee, this is your responsibility when it comes to fraud. And the reason, I always like to say this, the reason this is important is the number one way fraud is identified is not through your auditor, not through your internal auditor. It is through employees reporting matters. And so you need to make sure your employees understand how and when and what their responsibilities are. So that's just saying, hey, you're doing a good job, let's do a better job here, okay? Manual check process, this again came up during our walkthrough process. There seemed to be some confusion when a manual payroll check was issued. Between the payroll department and the business office department, there was two different sets of this is how it's done, no, this is how it's done. But because the manual check process is an area of risk, because you're going outside your normal process, let's have a written policy so everybody's very clear about, and we're not saying any fraud or anything happened here. What we're saying is let's just have a policy so everybody's very clear of how a manual check is to be issued. I think there was some discord as it relates to perhaps there's some wrongdoing going over here because somebody thought a policy wasn't being, followed when actually there was no written policy. All right, so before I go over the required communications, any questions over the management letter? All right, then let's wrap up and let's go over the governance letter. The governance letter is found on page 21 of your board docket. But these slides will also do a good job of reminding everybody of some of these required communications. The letter starts off just reminding everybody we implemented GASB 75. That's why that OPEB number is not consistent from year to year. And we also reminded the university, or governance, that, hey, we also adopted 89 this year. GASB 89 relates to the interest that you pay on debt. In the past, a portion of that interest expense would go into the cost of your capital project and be depreciated over the life of the capital. Now, no longer is that happening. All of your interest expense is going straight to your income statement. Okay. The next page, page 22 of the board docket, reminds everybody that there are estimates in your financial statements. Okay, and these estimates can change. And management obtains data and inputs in order to create these estimates. We review those to make sure they're reasonable. Things include allowance for doubtful accounts. Is the amount that you're going to collect from your students accurate? That net pension liability, right? That is a very large estimate. So this letter details to governance to make sure, hey, governance, make sure you understand that some of these numbers are estimates that could change. All right? So the next one, as it relates to things I like to make sure you understand, are these next two bullets: uncorrected misstatements and corrected misstatements. As governance, you always want to go and say, okay, what kind of product is my university giving to the auditors? And we're pleased to report we only have one past misstatement. So that's telling you that we didn't have to come in and provide, you know, all these adjustments, all of these recommendations, et cetera, to get your numbers accurate. The one uncorrected misstatement you will see on page 38, but just, you don't have to flip to it if you don't want to, that's that $725,000 of membership revenue that was recognized last year that technically should have been recognized. All right, as far as other required communications, we have to represent or talk to you about any conversations that we've had with management of discord or of disagreements or things outside of the normal audit cycle, which of course there were none. We got all the information we needed. There was nothing that we need to communicate to you, right? As far as significant issues discussed prior to management did not come to us and say, hey, you know, we'll hire you if you give us a clean opinion, right? And the audits of the group financial statements, that is our requirement, is to ensure that the auditors of the foundation, because the foundation statements are included with your financial statements, that they were independent, there was no conflict, we felt their work was adequate, et cetera, et cetera. We found 0 issues. All right. So that summarizes the results of the audit. I'd be happy to field any questions before quickly summarizing the appendix slides here.
We go to page 23 of the governance communication.
All right.
So, okay, so you talked about uncorrected misstatements, and then we have corrected misstatements, and then we have disagreements with management. So it says, for the purpose of this letter, a disagreement with management is a financial, accounting, reporting, or auditing matter, whether or not resolved to the satisfaction that could be significant to the financial statements or the auditor's report. No such agreement. So can you just give me an understanding of what that means by could be significant? What is there a termination for what is considered significant or not significant?
Well, that's probably a little bit of judgment in that. Yeah. I have had to report things here in the past. These are matters that there is a significant amount of time spent between the auditor and and the management, some type of accounting matter. For example, I had a public university once, who was trying to argue, a certain liability should be reported, but he was following FASB. FASB is for private institutions, right? It is not accounting standards that we use in government. And so he was an oil and gas guy that came to be a controller at a public university, and we spent, I would say, 15, 20 hours trying to explain to him, no, this doesn't apply to you. And so those types of things are reported there. Significant disagreement of accounting matters or things like that.
Okay, so significant is it somewhat subjective I mean, so there's no definition for what is significant and what is not.
No, there's not.
In this instance.
Yeah, but what I can do is I can copy and send you the auditing standard and the language that has in the auditing standard that requires us to report this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, because, and then I look at the financial report management letter, and then again, it talks about significant deficiency.
Okay, yeah.
Or things that are considered of significant importance. I just want to get an understanding for what that is.
So a couple of things real quickly. I will tell you, we do have a quantitative materiality that's set up throughout the audit, okay? And so those thresholds, I can't discuss with management in the room, but those are thresholds that we often use in defining certain significant deficiencies. So if we have an error over that number, then we're like, okay, well, we have a significant deficiency, right?
Okay.
Okay. Now, at the same time, you also have to ask yourself, could an error of significance have occurred? That could also be a significant deficiency or material weakness. So just because my error is $5,000, if there could have been a larger error, perhaps that too. So there is some auditor's judgment within that. I will say, throughout our audit process, we are very clear of how we, our thought process, and then our weekly status agendas with management. We're vetting all of these out to make sure that management fully understands the level that we're reporting these at. Does that help?
Yes,
Okay.
that does. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
I don't know if this is for you or Brian, but back to Perkins, so that, you know, we count the liability at 75 cents on the dollar. Is there also in your accounts receivable for the 500?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the receivable is still, let's say, $2.2 million with and then you have the 1.7 liability still will be able to go back.
Okay.
All right, so guys, I'm a little over my time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but the last couple of slides talk about some upcoming changes to GASB standards. As we implement those, I'll make sure we're fully aware of those. Also, industry trends, as I mentioned, on February 21st, and I'll make sure maybe Sandra gets this and passes this along. We're having that higher education industry conference, virtual industry conference, and we're going to be talking about some of these items specifically. We're going to talk a little bit about the fact that, you know, Moody's outlook for higher education for the second straight year remains negative. And that's primarily due to the flat or even lower enrollment growth that we're seeing across the country, fewer high school graduates, things you guys know. But again, the operating expenditures are continuing to outpace our revenue growth. So Moody's outlook is out there that you can take a look at that continues to talk about the stress that we have on higher education. The other thing that we'll talk a little bit about is is federal tax reform, and some of the questions that some of our universities are asking. The basketing of UBIT, parking tax benefits, the impact to our employees, excise taxes on highly paid coaches, et cetera. So I was actually in DC yesterday, and with the tax reform, there's still so many questions that are going on as it relates to the impact of the tax reform on higher ed and other nonprofits and government. And the problem is right now we've got the government shutdown, right? And so you don't have the people there to continue to work through these issues and questions. So a lot of it is just still, stay tuned.
The academic end.
You bet, unrelated business income. So some of our governments have, will now have, this unrelated business income tax due to certain parking, benefits that they're providing to employees. Like a Portland State, because it's a metro area that they provide, they're providing those benefits and those types of things are going to. And then there's the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. This is an act that requires certain security managers over your customer information. It's primarily related to financial institutions, but because you are a financial institution for your students, this involves you. And we're expecting that we're going to have to start implementing audit procedures over the compliance of this. So as more information comes out, I'm going to make sure that information gets to Brian, so those guys know what we'll be auditing, but primarily, what is your risk identification procedure to ensure your information is being protected? So we have a whole 50 minutes on this. We find this is very important. And so we've already held one WECFAST. I would certainly, Brian, I would encourage one of your team members to maybe attend that so you know what's coming down the pipe. And these are just other trends that that we've seen and we continue to hear about. Not that they're necessarily audit related, but we know that this is going on in higher education. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. I'm sorry to go a few minutes over, but are there any questions that I can answer?
Any questions? Great, thank you.
All right, of course, thank you. And I certainly want to thank management, thank Brian and all the various team members for assisting us with the audit. It's always a pleasure to get down this balance, so thank you.
Certainly, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Just a general question, so what role does this board have with verifying corrective action?
So we have, as a part of the, we haven't, as a board, been bringing back kind of corrective action plans. This has been managed through the audit process, as they're coming back to ensure that we.
Well, I was just glad to hear, because you've got January on the two that you're taking, and you said they're underway. I'm just not sure what our role is with that.
I would, as a best practice, what I would say your role is on that slide, I talked about findings that were repeated, right? And that's the IT one, and we talked about how it's been going in 19. Your role is to ensure that they're being resolved. So if I come back to you next year and we're still reporting this payroll or we're still reporting this, that's when you need to say, I need to report back from management of you just want to ensure it's not continually, that they're being resolved in the next meeting. Does that make sense? Yes, perfect.
Okay, so, this is an item that we need to approve. Let me read the staff recommendation for item 4.5. So this is acceptance of the annual financial and single item audit report. The staff recommendation is staff recommends the Finance and Facilities Committee, acting as the audit committee, accept the Oregon Tech 2018 annual financial report and 2018 single audit report as published. I need a motion.
I'll motion.
Okay, great. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that item is approved. Thank you, trustees. All right. So that brings us on the agenda to item number 6, other business or new business. Does anyone have any new business or other business to discuss? Okay. So with that, that brings us to the end of our agenda. There are no other questions or comments. The time is 10:28. Thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.